When I was only 12 years old, I shot my first zombie in a little survival horror game called Resident Evil. If you want to know how exactly a kid that age was able to get his hands on a game that was clearly meant for an adult audience, well, let's just say I had relatives who shared my passion for video games and didn't mind bending the rules. But they did it on my expense. They thought they could scare me off this particular game by putting me in a dark room and told me that if I die, I can't ever play this anymore because I only have one life. Which is such a blatant lie, of course. But instead of scaring me away, their plan backfired and we ended up playing the whole thing through as a team. And playing that game unleashed a weird mix of adrenaline, a touch of anxiety, heightened alertness, and pure dopamine every time I downed one of those shuffling corpses or cracked the solution to one of the many puzzles. Ever since that day, there was no turning back. I had always liked scary and spooky stories, but this was something different. It was the beginning of my obsession with horror games and horror movies. Maybe it's because this kind of horror was more thrilling than overwhelming, a distinction I would come to understand more deeply when I later encountered media that dared to explore far darker territory. Yet, back then, I only knew this kind of horror that felt like a jolt, intense, exciting, but ultimately, safe. With these kind of games, you turn off the console, everything is fine. You had your fill of thrill. Maybe you got munched on a few times, were treated to a brutal cutscene. But all in all, you know that no monster from outer space wants your biomass. There is no zombie or Wendigo shuffling after you, and no killer robot from the future wants to extinguish you. Even though death by Snoo Snoo with robots might become a possibility very soon.
It worked!
You're one sexy man. Fill up, J. Fry!
Little did I know the true horror was still out there, lurking in the shadows of games that dared to explore the darkest corners of the human mind. This kind of horror you can't exercise with an obscure camera, and you can't shoot it down like a monster either, because it's based on the scariest thing we have. Reality. These games don't just brush against the surface of discomfort, they force players to confront themes of abuse, sexual violence, the crushing weight of guilt. They bring to life the mental battles many face alone and in silence, making the player grapple with horrors that are all too real and could happen at any given moment. It's no wonder then that this kind of horror struggles to find a home in the mainstream. Topics like these aren't just difficult, they're taboo. The media will not touch these topics, most shows are under strict guidelines to never speak of them, ChatGPT will not for the life of me even go near certain keywords, and even horror games themselves mostly stick to safer scares.
So it's every single one of them.
And to be honest, who can blame them? After all, most people turn to entertainment as an escape, not as a reminder of humanity's darkest impulses. Tell me, who among you, sound of mind, would willingly walk into the woods at night? And yet, despite these taboos and the resistance, these games exist. They may not dominate the charts, but they carve out a space in the hearts of those who dare to face them. The term cult following comes to mind. But here's another question, maybe the question. Why? Why do these games exist in the first place, and why are certain people drawn towards these games? Who in their right mind would willingly want to hear stories about abuse, about violence, about the worst our species has to offer? Are we all, including yours truly, complete lunatics? Yes. I am kinda insane. I do enjoy walking in the woods at night, but only because I know for a fact that nobody else is there. And we have no dangerous animals in these woods either, so I know that everyone else is too scared to stroll through, which leaves me alone. Which means I can have some much needed alone time. Can you imagine how peaceful and quiet it is when you look up into the night sky, seeing only the moon? So what do you find in these games that you would least expect, but is still hidden in plain sight? And the answer is humanity. We're not just thrill seekers, we're explorers of the human condition, eager to understand life in all its messy, sometimes painful and always profound forms. These games, in their rawness, offer a mirror to the parts of ourselves and society that are often hidden away. And by the way, this notion is nothing new. Think about your true crime series you watch in the evenings when the masses sit in front of the TV and collectively ask the same thing. How could such a well-mannered human being do something so heinous? Or better yet, look even further back in time to, let's say, Shakespeare. I don't mean the tales like Romeo and Juliet or A Midsummer Night's Dream, I mean the heavy hitters. Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, King Lear, these tragedies do exactly what the horror games I will talk about do too. Delve into the darkest recesses of the human mind. Don't believe me? Okay, let's sum it up. In Macbeth, the main character, General Macbeth, played here by Magneto, is prophesied to become the next king. So he kills his king in order to claim the throne. But the prophecy also said that he will lose his kingship very soon and under very specific circumstances. So Macbeth becomes not only guilt-ridden because he dispatched a good man, he also becomes extremely paranoid. This paranoia turns him into a tyrant who slaughters and prosecutes lots of people and friends to make sure the prophecy doesn't come true, which ironically makes the prophecy come true. Macbeth, once a noble man and best of them all, is now nothing more but a shell of his former self. Eventually, he is slain by a rebellion he conjured up by his own actions, and all of this only happened because he lusted for power. To us, this play is a tragedy, but if you would take the position of Macbeth, you would be in a horror movie, especially when you start seeing the ghost of a friend you had assassinated. In Othello, a good-natured yet emotionally vulnerable character is manipulated by a supposed friend into jealousy, which drives him to strangle the love of his life. But Hamlet takes the cake. Hamlet centers around a son struggling with grief over his father's death. Grief so strong, it spirals him into madness, and ultimately leads to a cascade of deaths. 9 out of 11 central characters are dead by the final act. These plays are not written for entertainment alone. They serve as an excellent exploration of the human psyche, showing how delicate, brittle, and easily fractured it can be if not handled with care. Just like the best psychological horror games, they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the mind's vulnerabilities. That is the statement I want to make. I think I have to clarify what kind of horror I actually mean, because even based on reality can mean many things, so I want to present 2 games I find most fitting. The first one is a no-brainer and needs no introduction because it is by far one of the most successful psychological horror games ever created. And of course I am talking about Silent Hill 2 and its remake, which came out this year and is on par with the original. This game is a beautiful but also harrowing exploration of a bunch of broken characters that never received the help they needed. Silent Hill is a mystical place with the ability to call people and shine light on their biggest flaws. But it isn't doing it in a benign way and more in a way that would befit purgatory. The town manifests all the guilt, the shame and the bad memories the characters have and uses it as apparitions that will haunt them until they come to terms with their repressed issues. It is unfortunate that most, if not all people that Silent Hill calls, never leave again. And we, as players, are invited to see 3 different stories through the eyes of the main character, James Sunderland. First, there's Angela Orozco, a deeply tragic character whose story revolves around themes of abuse and trauma. Her journey is not about defeating her enemies, it's about grappling with the relentless, inescapable torment imposed on her by the people who were supposed to love and protect her.
I see what you're doing. It's always the same with you. You're only after one thing. Angela, please.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead. Say it. Or you could just force me. Like he always did. You disgusting pig.
Her demeanor, especially in the remake, is more than believable. She irks away from physical contact, is suspicious of James because he is a male.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I was just...
Hey, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you.
No! I'm sorry! I've been bad! Please don't!
And fears the worst when James mentions that he is looking for a young girl he has seen running around town.
A little girl?
Yeah, Angela? Are you alright? Angela?
No. Please. You shouldn't be here.
Angela, it's okay.
No, don't touch me!
And just to clarify, James is actually trying to find and protect the girl. But Angela doesn't know this and jumps to conclusions because of her backstory. Silent Hill finds in James an unwitting but effective torturer for Angela, simply because he doesn't know anything about her. Every encounter between the two is filled by misunderstandings on James's side and absolute anxiety and distrust on Angela's side because of what she has been through. This conundrum is solved by the end of the game, but then it's already too late. Angela's experience in and outside of Silent Hill is a devastating reflection of how deep-seated trauma can feel like an inescapable reality. One that she describes as
You see it too? For me, it's always like this.
Unfortunately, she is not able to leave her role as a victim and disappears by the end of the game. It is heavily implied that she never left town, and never will. Then there's Eddie Dombrowski. Eddie was tormented from a young age because of his weight and his perceived inadequacies, which left him with thinly veiled anger issues and resentment towards the world and himself.
Just put the gun to their head and...
Eddie?
Oh, hi, James.
What happened here? Who was that?
I don't know. It just came at me.
Okay.
His stay in Silent Hill confronts him with the fact that he shot a dog and its owner in a fit of rage when he couldn't take it anymore. Ever since his arrival in town, he sees that same man over and over again, which he shoots over and over again. Failing to learn his lesson, he just gets angrier and angrier while the town digs its claws deeper and deeper into his weak spots. And yet again, it is James with an unassuming comment that cuts like a knife into Eddie and makes his paranoia and hate visible to us.
Well, at least you got your appetite back. Are you alone here, Eddie?
This is not the comment that breaks him, but it gets him very close. When we meet him for the last time in the game, Eddie's repressed rage manifested into full-blown violence, which leads to his demise at the hands of James.
Maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead. And a corpse can't laugh. You think I don't see it? But you've been laughing at me all along. ever since we first met. But you ain't laughing now, are you?
And then there's James himself, whose journey is perhaps the most haunting of all. At first glance, he seems like an everyman. He's not out for blood, can't defend himself very well. Yes, you would say he can't even hurt a fly. He is drawn to Silent Hill by the promise of reuniting with his deceased wife, who died 3 years ago.
Her name's Mary. She's my wife.
I'm sorry.
But as the town peels back layer after layer of James's psyche, we learn the truth. James is not the hero of this story. In fact, James is the one who took his wife's life. And even though she was diagnosed with a terminal sickness and didn't have to live long anymore, it was not his decision to make. James is a man crippled by guilt, running from the consequences of his own actions. His journey through Silent Hill is one of self-discovery. What he finds in this town is the horrifying truth of his own capacity for darkness, which he tried to block out.
I know what you are. I know why I needed you. But it's all over now.
Silent Hill doesn't just present these characters for shock value. It invites us to step into their shoes, to see the world through their eyes and to feel the weight of their decisions. The game isn't just horror, it's a reflection of the human condition in its most vulnerable state. And even though I am conflicted with each character and their choices, I can't help but understand them. Look at it from this perspective. If you were shown from a young age that there is no such thing as safety, wouldn't you eventually grow weary of searching for it and just end the search by extinguishing the hope? Or worse, just keep existing because you are convinced it cannot get any better. If your dignity was stripped from you over and over again, wouldn't you think of reclaiming it by any means necessary, even if it came at the expense of others? Like, I'll show them who is weak. That thought never crossed your mind? If you were burdened with the care of someone who could no longer bring any benefit to your life, but only drained your resources daily, wouldn't there be a whisper in your head asking, how much longer can I do this? Or worse, how much longer do I have to do this? That is how it gets you. Forget about the mannequins, the flesh sacks, the grotesque imagery, it's not important. The true horror is this. Silent Hill serves as a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often those that reside within us. And that includes me and you. There is another great game that I finished exactly once and never dared to touch again until recently. Not because it's a bad game, mind you, but because the story took me for a ride I haven't forgotten in over 10 years. And that is The Cat Lady. This indie darling offers an unadorned look into the crippling effects of depression and anxiety. But it also offers a very important and heartfelt silver lining, provided you get through the whole game. Our main character is Susan, a 40-year-old lonely and bitter woman who decides right at the beginning of the game to take 43 sleeping pills at once. Her last words, which are only heard by us, are,
"Thanks for nothing. Goodbye."
The only one with her at this crucial moment is Teacup, one of the stray cats she invites into her apartment. It's a quiet, lonely end that reflects the view of her world, a place devoid of hope, where even her passing seems insignificant. But death does not come easily for Susan. Instead of slipping away into darkness, she awakens in a surreal afterlife, greeted by a mysterious figure known as the Lady of Maggots. This supernatural force has bigger plans for her, imposing a blessing of immortality and a grim task to rid the world of 5 deranged individuals known as the Parasites.
As harmless as they might appear, parasites are the evil scum of the earth, and they all deserve to die. Bring those deceitful bastards in front of me, and we'll make them regret for everything they've done.
Only when she fulfilled her task, her burden of immortality will be lifted off of her shoulders. And right from the get-go, you can see an interesting inversion. Throughout history and a truckload of fairy tales, immortality is seen as a price that needs to be obtained by any means necessary. Heroically or through villainy, it doesn't matter. But here it is the other way around. For someone who doesn't see the point in living, immortality may sound like a punishment. And for Susan, it is.
I finally did it. I killed myself. That's all I ever wanted. And yet, it turns out to be just another failure. I want this suffering to stop.
So what exactly happened to Susan that made her so averse to what is essentially the Holy Grail? Just like in Silent Hill, Susan's horror is not rooted in the supernatural. That comes later. As we move through the game, we get to know our protagonist better. We get glimpses into Susan's past, which reveal a series of events that chipped away at her self-esteem and her ability to enjoy and appreciate life. We come to see her arguing with a husband who berates her.
I'm done talking to you.
Of course you are. That's what you always do, isn't it? You run out of arguments, you stop talking to me, then you lock yourself in the bathroom and fucking cry. I'm sick of repeating the same old thing over and over again.
Then why won't you give me a break, for God's sake?
In conversations, we hear her talking about past experiences of self-loathing that were long-standing issues before the game even begins. And we witness the event that set everything in motion. The one moment that destroyed her life and took the lives of everyone she loved and left her all alone. The cruelest part of that moment is that it was just a simple mistake. No spells, no monsters took her family, it was just a curveball the size of an atomic bomb thrown by life. But it happened to Susan, so she takes the blame for it. Her personal horror, which is shaped by guilt, a sense of worthlessness and a feeling of being powerless, has been a permanent companion ever since. Which makes the contrast with her supernatural encounters even more striking. In fact, that is the part where Susan shines, where we see her stand up for herself. When one of the parasites slimes his way into her personal life, only to use it against her, she makes him pay. When a deranged Bonnie and Clyde couple kidnap her, she gives them a taste of their own medicine. When one of the parasites turns out to be a stalker of hers that breaks into her apartment and threatens one of her friends, she summons her cats, which eat that bastard alive. And when that same friend of hers is about to make the single biggest mistake of her life, she's able to soothe the situation, revealing her buried heart of gold. Objectively, Susan is far from worthless. In every single crisis the game throws at her, she comes out winning. But remember, Susan is immortal. No matter how often she dies, and she does, she always comes back. On this front, she is fearless because she can afford to be fearless. She's got nothing to lose because she literally can't lose. So here's the question, where's the actual horror in this game? And the answer is, again, where you would never look. In the mundane, in the everyday things. There is one special mechanic in the game that is only used once, and at first you might think, why is it even here? And by the time you finish this section it will click, but for now, bear with me. Susan has just dealt with the first parasite and is going home. It's a place where she should be able to decompress and come to grips with all that happened in the last few days. She just dealt with someone who made many portraits out of human bones and meat. And what's more, she saved some lives in the process. But she doesn't feel happy about it and she can't even unwind. What is supposed to be her apartment, her home, doesn't feel like home at all. As soon as Susan enters, a minigame starts. Now the player has to guide her through a series of mundane tasks, sorting through the mail, brewing coffee, getting something to eat, take a bath. In the bottom left of the screen, 2 meters appear while we do this. A red one will fill up every time a mundane task fails, and the green one fills up every time something doesn't go up in flames, which can, by the way, totally happen. Example. Susan wants to take a shower, but since she lives in a very old building, you have to put coins into a unit outside her apartment, or there will be no electricity and no warm water. Did you think of that? The coffee Susan brews can be spoiled by simply not checking the expiration date on the milk before you put it in the mug. Did you do it?
Oh, for God's sake. This milk's off. It's completely ruined my coffee.
The game will give you hints, but it will not spell this stuff out for you, which makes it tricky to not fall into these traps. So yes, it is really easy to fill up the red meter, and when it did during my first playthrough, I was shocked at the result.
In my head it's like hell. I don't feel I've got the will. In my head it's so plain. God, please wash me with your rain. In my head it's so strange. I can't
And that's when it dawns on you. This isn't just a quirky minigame about chores, it's a window into Susan's mind. For her, these minor mishaps aren't just frustrating. You can rebrew the coffee, but that's not the point. Every little thing serves as an echo, a reminder that her carelessness was responsible for the death of her family. And we can only imagine how many times she has run that lab. Incidentally, this is also the best depiction I have ever seen of what it's like to live with severe anxiety. For people with this affliction, and of course, like Susan, the simplest tasks can become insurmountable obstacles, and every perceived failure amplifies an already overwhelming sense of worthlessness until it gets too much to bear and you simply stop functioning. It's like walking through a minefield where each step could potentially set off a chain reaction of doubt and despair. And it is one of the most mentally exhausting experiences you can ever have. The game never explicitly tells you this, it doesn't have to. By putting you into Susan's shoes and making it so easy to fail, it says everything without saying a word. In that moment, you realize the true horror of the cat lady isn't in the supernatural forces. For her, the scary part isn't facing literal monsters. It's in the quiet moments afterwards where she's left alone with herself, her thoughts, the crushing responsibility of a past she cannot change. And that's the true heart of the cat lady. It leaves you with the unsettling realization that the hardest battles aren't fought in haunted hospitals or cursed graveyards, but in the spaces we call home. In the end, Susan's story is about finding the strength to face another day no matter how lost or broken she feels. And just like I said earlier, there is a way for Susan to get better. Several endings you can achieve in The Cat Lady will make Susan take steps to take back control of her life and reconcile with her past. But these endings also make it clear that that path will not be easy, but still the single most valuable thing that can be done. Also, I just want to mention there are many other great games that I could use as an example, but these two should adequately get my point across that this kind of horror isn't for everyone. The topics we touched upon are more brutal than any zombie apocalypse could ever be, and it is absolutely understandable that most people do not want to get in touch with what might be their biggest personal fear. But there's also another reason why this genre of horror doesn't have as many entries as its more popular counterpart, and that is because it's incredibly hard to create and get it right. Not so much because of the game mechanics, but because the story and the characters must be on point. Dark stories like these live because they dare to show deeply flawed but still relatable human beings with all their nuances they might have. And accomplishing that is infuriatingly hard. Most of the time, this can only be accomplished by a delicate touch, an incredible amount of empathy, and an immense amount of research. One misstep and your potential game is ruined by the risk of being perceived as bland, exploitative, or worse, it grossly misrepresents the featured topics. And that can be downright insulting to anyone who went through such experiences, and when that happens, your whole game goes down. A game that manages to stand as a mostly positive example for a well-written character and story is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Hellblade is often celebrated for its groundbreaking portrayal of psychosis. This time around we control Senua, a Pictish warrior who suffers from sad illness, meaning she sees, hears and feels things that aren't really there, but are real to her. It is implied that she was born with an affinity for this, and due to a tragic and not at all stellar childhood, the psychosis escalated. Senua herself sees this as a curse, a darkness she has to get rid of, and we witness her frequently fight with her hallucinations.
There is no one here but me.
Not you.
Did you think that I would let you go? That you lost me back in the wilds? I will never let you go. You can't get rid of me. I am your shadow. And I will be watching when you draw your last dying gasp.
The developers worked closely with mental health professionals and individuals who experience psychosis to create a representation that was both respectful and immersive, which is a testament to the level of research and empathy required to handle such topics effectively. And yet, even here, some players felt that the game's approach sometimes veered into territory that could be perceived as exploitative or overly dramatic. For example, the voices Senua hears are not just used to describe her mental state, they also help in battles and warn her when an enemy is behind her or when she is low on health. And the runes she sees are actually a game mechanic. Whenever runes cover the screen, the player has to find a geometrical shape in the landscape that looks like the rune to unlock the next area. It's Hellblade's version of lock and key. On the one hand, it is an innovative and original way to explore and incorporate the state of psychosis in a game. But on the other, we know that this is a concession in relation to the real psychosis. What makes the discussion even more dicey is that different cultures interpret psychosis differently. Some don't see it as a curse and more of a blessing from the gods, which muddies the waters on how to portray this mental state even further. And even that is portrayed in the game via the voices Senua hears.
I hear her thoughts. It's not too late to get into the boat and go back. No one will judge her. No one will ever know. Oh, she heard us.
It is made abundantly clear that Senua's hallucinations are not as black and white as they seem. After all, they are a part of her, and every single one is here for a reason. Sometimes the illusions help and spur her on to not give up.
Don't give up. Not like this.
Other times, they want nothing more than to bury her under a metaphorical rock so she never sees daylight again.
Look at you. A warrior. Worthless. Weak. Pathetic. Go on. Feel sorry for yourself, because there's no one left to do that for you.
And the warrior has to navigate through all of that. Along her journey, we see Senua take one step forward, then 2 steps back, and then a jump forward, and then she falls down a chasm of self-loathing and has the hardest time getting out of there.
And all your suffering will have been for nothing! Shut up!
And it is a joy to see her get back up again and inch her way forward, despite the setbacks. As you can see, the line between representing mental illness and using it as a tool for horror is incredibly thin. and not everyone agreed on which side of that line Hellblade landed. And even though we have some concessions for the sake of gameplay, like the lock and key mechanic, these representations are all in good faith. Still, I hope I made my point. It is entirely possible to make even the worst kind of topics work if they're handled with care. If developers really do the research, they could end up with something incredible that rivals Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, Goethe's Faust, and the plays of Shakespeare. Something that withstands the test of time and will be revered by generations to come. Something that sheds light on and gives a new perspective on the most interesting thing humans can write about: humanity in all its glory and failings. I do sincerely hope that some games will reach that status of high literature one day, because they deserve it already. But this is ironically the reason why not many creators dare to venture into this territory in the first place. That kind of care which is required to create such works of art is always linked to an enormous amount of research and fine-tuning, which just takes a lot of time. Time you could spend by making a simpler, happier game, which most people proceed to do. And just to iterate my point from the beginning, who can blame them? As we discussed, there are several ways to work with horror that are way less scarring and can cater to the thrill most gamers crave when they hear the word horror, which is their right, absolutely. Hell, as a palate cleanser, right after this video, I even recommend watching the movie Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, which is a comedy that spoofs all the horror tropes the last 30 years have to offer. It is a delight to watch, honestly. Grab some popcorn, do yourself that favor. But for those who are willing to explore these uncomfortable truths, the result is often something deeply memorable. Like any powerful piece of media, these stories and experiences can leave a lasting impression, becoming a small but meaningful part of you. While these games may not have the widespread appeal of blockbuster horror titles, they offer something unexpected, much like a walk through the dark woods. Out of all the video games out there, it's these narratives that can expand your understanding of what it means to be human. They might even deepen your empathy simply by allowing you to witness fictional characters wrestling with their darkest, most private struggles. And if you've ever faced similar battles, you might find a sense of catharsis here. A feeling of being understood and seen. And then there's also another, perhaps more sinister reason these games resonate, and it's kind of a personal reason. Because Silent Hill and its peers show the worst humanity has to offer, they can act like a negative mirror. They can and will reflect the monsters or miserable beings we could become if we're not careful. It's a twisted reality check. A way to measure your own moral compass against the characters you see in there. But I think it's important to glance into that mirror every now and then, just to ensure that the monsters remain on the right side of the glass. Lest you take something back into the woods with you which shouldn't be there.